Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We have for you all our reaction and review of Skeleton Crew Episode 7. We're going to be talking full spoilers. So, of course, as always, make sure you have seen the episode before you watch tonight's stream. We will be getting into all the spoiler details that happened in this episode. It was a pretty big episode for the plot. It moved forward dramatically as we kind of expected. So, a lot to talk about here with Jod and the pirates and the kids and Atten and all the stuff that was revealed here in this episode. So if you have not seen it, now's your chance. Go watch it. It was another shorter episode to my dismay. Uh, so you can watch it and still catch the stream here in a little bit, even if you decide to go watch it right now. So that is your warning. Moving on to the episode. Make sure you like tonight's stream. It helps us out a lot with the algorithm if you just hit that like button. So do so, scroll down, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We will be covering episode 8 as well. And then when Skeleton Crew ends, it's not the end of Star Wars, lads. If you are just joining us for the first time, just discovering our channel during this show process, we will be streaming every Tuesday continuing into the future around 7:30 Pacific. We do news streams, talk about the latest in Star Wars news, talk about a lot of different topics, and allow you guys to more directly interact with us than even these streams, where you get to send in your questions and your comments and your theories and everything into the chat. So make sure you do that right now if you want to have your chat answered in tonight's show. But after this, we will be streaming still. So join us every Tuesday, even after next week, so you can talk about more Star Wars. And then I also have another stream to plug, because tomorrow we are going to be doing a stream. We've been wanting to do this for a few weeks now, and we want to, get it in before we get too far into 2025. We're already a week into 2025. So tomorrow we are going to be doing a stream recapping 2024, talking about our favorite things, least favorite things, just the whole year in terms of Star Wars. So shows, TV, comics, books, all the stuff that came out last year in Star Wars. And then we're going to preview 2025, talk about some of the things we're most looking forward to in books, comics, TV shows, and the like. And then also some of the things that seem not really on our radar, that maybe they could be good. And we want you guys to deliver in the comments section of that stream, all of your guys' most anticipated Star Wars shows and the things you liked most in 2024, your rankings in 2024 of all the stuff you saw or read or watched or whatever played. We had a big video game last year as well. So join us tomorrow around the same time, 7:30 Pacific, where we will be discussing all of that. Hope to see you guys all there, and can't wait to discuss all of that stuff in that stream. And then now to the main topic, Skeleton Crew Episode 7. Tonight's episode was directed by Lee Isaac Chung. He is a veteran of Star Wars TV, did Mandalorian Season 3, a couple episodes, or one episode over there, and then has directed an Oscar-nominated movie, Minari, and then also directed Twisters this summer. So he's got some range into blockbuster as well as drama. And this episode was about 29 minutes with credits. Again, to my dismay, I really think it's ridiculous that big budget television can't just at least hit 35 to 40 minutes. But this was still, I think, better than last week, in my opinion. But I'm going to pass it over to you first, Sanak. What were your thoughts on tonight's episode of Skeleton Crew?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely liked it. Definitely feels like one of those episodes that I had a little bit earlier in the season where I wasn't 100% sure about, and grew on me as I watched it more and more, especially with
Mm-hmm.
all the visual treats that we got here around at Atten, just around like the ship designs and everything. So yeah, I mean, definitely agree. I want a longer episode, and we got to start off with the parents, and that was all exciting, but it felt a little diluted there for me when I wanted them to kind of chew a little bit more on a little bit of the corporate, the bureaucratic, the systemic, structure in place here on Atten. So yeah, a little frustrating in that sense, but I definitely enjoyed it more and more as we went on, and that's mostly because the kids get chew on some really great stuff here. Nick Frost gets to kind of come back as SM33 after kind of being MIA for a bit, so that nice balance was achieved there. with their performances. But of course, we can all kind of see why this is Jude Law's favorite episode because he really gets to be, I'd say at this point, irredeemable, right? Like I know people in our chat are saying, "Oh, is he going to be a Jedi and Luke's Jedi Order and all that?" And it's not necessarily that he's done something evil that he's like, oh, because he's been hurt by something, all this and that. And I'm sure he's got a backstory that'll like explain a little bit more, and we might see that in the finale. But he's slimy. He's
Mhm.
opportunistic. He showed everything that you would expect like an inverted Jack Sparrow to have, right? Like a Jack Sparrow outwardly shows all those things, but then he's like, when I'm actually with you and I'm close to you and I'm trying to be the good guy, it just might be more during moments of convenience. This is like, no, no. Like it's been so inconvenient trying to be nice, trying to play your game, doing everything possible to get to this riches here. And just the look in his eyes after he gets to go to the mines and everything, it's like, oh my God. Like him walking towards the parents with their kids after that sweet reunion. And then bam, he's got the lightsaber out. I'm like, oh boy. Oh boy. So that finale, it's gonna be insane. I think the fact that we've already reached the mine and everything, instead of advancing towards it with, like, a militaristic force and all that, it feels like they're gonna be running through the suburbs. We're gonna have almost like an inversion of, oh, when you're a kid, like a Whim and a Neil, you're pretending all these big, grand galaxy spanning adventures and all that, but now it's like, no, I'm trying to navigate through the backwoods of my home place, a place that I did everything to kinda get away from, but now I'm like, I now have managed to come back and understand and appreciate it, and now this is becoming a battleground, but in some ways, that is to my advantage. I feel like this finale is gonna be very, very much shot in a very similar way to, like, what we get with, like, the Stranger Things season finales and all that, so I think that'll be really good, especially with the lessons the kids have learned, how they developed. It was just nice seeing the kids have fun too. They played a little slap ball on the ship, which was cool. So, yeah, I enjoyed it, and the more I talk about it, I definitely enjoy it more and more. But man, I am so curious about how they're gonna handle Jod because I'd be happy. I really would be happy with whichever direction they go. They can redeem him and give him that Jack Sparrow vibe, or they could just be like, "No, screw that. We're we're not letting him get past this one planned season of Skeleton Crews," right? So, it'll be exciting. The supervisor is still at large. If they're even alive, if there's even replacements, who knows? But I'm invested in seeing just how much chaos Jod is ready to unleash and what these kids and their reunited families are really gonna be up to kinda counter him.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what his plan is because, obviously there's so many droids there. Like, yeah, it would seem surprising even with his powers to be able to take everybody down. So I think that's where the supervisor will come in next episode as we slowly get his plan unveiling and when he decides to, he's going to try to contact the pirates again, right? So how he decides to implement his plan and take advantage of the situation, I think will be the more exciting part next week. But I agree. I enjoyed this episode for what it was. Again, I'm gonna harp on it every time they do this, and it's not really nitpicking this episode. I just think it's a Disney Plus problem. It's been a problem forever. If they just did their episodes where every episode was 30 minutes, then we know what to expect, right? But when like the first episode of the
Yeah.
show is 49 minutes, and then the next one's 30, and then the next one's 45, and then the next one's 32, and it's just like, you know, it just I wish there was just some consistency. I think it would help overall with all their shows, with the unevenness of their shows, if you just had some type of consistency. It doesn't need to be the same standard runtime every episode, but it needs to be in the similar ballpark, and we're getting, 10, 15-minute differences between episodes. It's just I don't know how you make TV like that, really. Like, I don't know how you make well-structured TV like that. But again, once again, like last week, I have that complaint, but I felt like the content here is really good. It's
Yeah.
just a lot of, missed opportunity to do even more. Like, I wanted more of Brutus. I was hoping for a little more. I like the way Jod takes him out in this episode because it is ruthless and it shows, a continued progression of this character to the point where we're like, he is getting closer to being irredeemable. I mean, he was already kind of getting there when he sent SM-33 to kill a bunch, four kids, but then, shooting his ex-captain in the head, uh, taking the kids hostage again. killing us him at 33. You're probably not dead, but slicing his head off with a lightsaber, coming after their parents, saying he's going to chop them up into pieces. He is getting to that point of being a pure villain, and I did enjoy seeing Jude Law get to kind of ham it up as a villain, but he does a great job of still kind of keeping it grounded and playing with some of the scarier tropes of pirates that you don't see these types of shows necessarily, or these types of movies always go into. More, pirates are often in these types of 80s vibes, a little bit more fun, uh, easily beatable by kids, outwitted by the kids. And here he seems to have the upper hand. And I was kind of glad they did that. Like it just, not that, Jod is some legacy character that has appearances and other things, and we need to keep him at a similar level. Like he could get beat by the kids, but I did enjoy that here he does have the upper hand, and he actually seems scary if he's now the overall villain of the show. If he's now the big bad of the show, I'm glad he's at least intimidating, that you at least feel like he's unpredictable, that you at least feel like he can take control of the situation and actually conquer Atten. Because before, the version of Jod we got before episode 5 didn't feel like that type of guy. So I'm glad they've kind of morphed him into this. When he needs to be, he's ruthless. And
Yeah.
I think that's worked really well for this character. So I really appreciated all his appearances. I love seeing the pirate crew and all the different alien species. I thought that was great. The kids, I thought, had some good moments in here. Wim had a couple good moments. Fern had some good moments. I liked the dialogue, their banter back and forth with Jod when he was telling them all to be quiet. I thought that was really funny. But I appreciated what we had here. But like you said, with the parents, like if this was a 45-minute episode, we could have done another 10 minutes with the parents hatching their plan, what happens to them after, instead of just these scenes that feel glossed over, like we're missing a little piece of the plot. We could have done a couple more scenes with the kids talking about their adventure and really reflecting on the time they've had, and really reflecting on the message they see from their parents, feeling like the situation's hopeless, that type of stuff. I just think these little moments are cut in this show and a lot of Disney Plus shows for quicker pacing. And I don't know if it's an analytics thing that tells them like, hey, shorter episodes get more people to watch faster, more bingeable. I'm not sure what it is, because this is a trend across everything they make, but it is just you can't help but feel like in a longer format like television, these moments that make television great, where you have characters actually reflecting and talking and living with the things that they're going with, all those seem cut in a lot of these Disney Plus shows. And Andor is one of the few where almost every episode was 40 to 50 minutes that actually sat and reflected on moments. And this isn't necessarily an introspective show, but I do think those types of things could still, help improve from a, for me, like a 6, 7 out of 10 show to like a solid 8 out of 10 show, 9 out of 10 show, where it is something that you feel like you have a deeper connection to everything rather than just enjoying the fun of the pirate adventure. So I still think that's missing, especially in this last couple episodes. But hopefully this last episode is a big one, and I think as long as the events are satisfying, it doesn't matter really what the length is at this point, because we're in the last episode. They're not going to really fix some of those inherent problems by making the last episode an hour and a half, but it would be nice to have a really meaty episode to chew on. But overall, enjoyed this week. Enjoyed everything that was in the episode, at least conceptually and as a piece of content. But let us know what you guys think in the chat. We are going to get to the chat now. And for the next, this will be back to a full length Star Wars Lads reaction show. So between an hour and a half and 2 hours, depending on how the conversation flows. So it's really up to you guys how long we go tonight. We'll try to get to everybody's comments, but we can't guarantee we will. We do talk a lot. I hope that's one of the reasons why you guys like our show. And we get pretty detailed. So if you want to make sure your comment is on the stream tonight, send in a super chat. We do answer super chat first, and then we get to everybody else first come, first serve. So that is your chance. If you see the stream winding down, getting close to the hour and a half mark, you might want to send in a super chat. Make sure you get your comment on tonight's stream. If not, you're going to have to save it for next week when we talk about our last episode of Skeleton Crew. So getting into the chat here, our first person, as always, is Anthony Tiff. Thanks for joining us again, Anthony. Anthony says, I found the Master and Apprentice passage that I said last week on page 93. It's also found Greg Rucka book, found in the Greg Rucka book, Guardians of the Wills. The full line is a chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the force be restored. The moment between breaths is the balance of the force between life and death, rest and action, serenity and passion, hope and despair. In my opinion, this means that the prophecy was misread by the Jedi and the Sith. Balance has been interpreted in different ways by Lucas, Filoni, and other Star Wars creators and fans, even. And I think that's cool that everyone has a different perspective on it, including me. Note the prophecy makes no mention of destroying the Sith, only bringing balance to the Force. The passage above, in my opinion, is that balance is not meant to be achieved ultimately and permanently, which is why the dark side will crop up yet again, or even the Sith. So that's a lot. Thank you for sharing that passage again, because last week, for those of you who didn't join us last week, this was something that was brought up, and we couldn't remember exactly what page and what the passage from Master and Apprentice said. I haven't read Master and Apprentice since 2019 or whenever it came out. Read it immediately when it came out. But I think it's an interesting interpretation. I mean, obviously it's canon. It's the canon kind of telling of the prophecy, versus whatever the legends version of the prophecy of the chosen one was. I still fully believe that Lucas's intention with it is to have been directed towards balance being a more spiritual thing, as in when the darkness is gone, everybody's at peace, at balance. I think that is what he intended balance to mean. Some people take it more literally, that it is too light, too dark, that's equal, that's balance. And I think both, I mean, everybody can have their opinion on it. I tend to lean towards what I glean more out of Lucas, even if this is the canon version of the prophecy. But just because it's Claudia Gray writing it versus George Lucas, I tend to lean towards the interpretation I feel I gained from it. But I'm glad you shared it, and I appreciate your perspective. And thanks for clarifying what exactly it said this week.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting quote, especially when it's, with your own interpretation and a little bit more embellished in the details here. But yeah, it's kind of like what my food for thought was. It is adjustable, it is perspective, it is just is, right? And it's all always up into interpretation, it's always in flux. Like Liam said, some people you'll see like old Legends videos being like the Gray Jedi. There is no passion. There is passion there. It's like, okay, you're just copying the key points of both codes and kind of jamming it together. That's not necessarily how to the extreme I would go to, but the idea of like understanding your balance might not necessarily be the same as, okay, there should be this many Jedi and dark side users, or should everyone be more like a Mace Windu and know how to balance their darkness and use it as a tool and learn from it? Or is it that sometimes balance is lost because you're stagnant, like the Jedi Order is, and it's not necessarily that Palpatine came and undid it and all these others set before him. It's more like they took opportunities that were available to them because the Jedi lost balance by staying the same and all that, right? And like again, that interpretation I think has always been there. I do agree with what Liam is saying that, it's meant to be a spiritual balance. It's kind of meant to be the defeat of evil by good. And I think it works best for the original trilogy because it is very much the hero's journey played out and brought to that cinematic screen, right? That obviously changes with the prequels. That's changed even further with the sequel. So, in a way, I don't mind if the Chosen One prophecy is constantly interpreted and applied in different ways. So, I think there's place for both, and I think they're both equally valid. I think that's why it's so detailed and elongated between the Greg Rucka book and Claudia Gray book because there's just so many ways of looking at it, and sometimes being so adamant about it being one certain thing is maybe why the Jedi fell, maybe why Anakin didn't get the treatment that he needed, maybe why Anakin maybe fed into that himself. Like there's so many ways of looking at prophecies, which the Jedi rightfully look at and be like, it shouldn't be taken 100% literally, just like our visions shouldn't, just like every single thing that we do as an order shouldn't be just so rigid and all that. And yet it is something that isn't entirely wrong. It's just you got to learn how to like kind of move with it. So I think it is pretty interesting. I personally I'm always kind of open to the idea of it being not redone, but like reinterpreted for the situation, for the era that you're in. Maybe not necessarily chosen one, but balance for sure.
Yeah, I think that's part of the way Star Wars evolves, right? Is reinterpretation. Not that there's a right or wrong in a reinterpretation, right? Like, I think just like any philosophy, people could use the chosen one prophecy to justify whatever their beliefs are, right? So we can have different variations and perspectives. I think it would be obviously a mistake for Lucasfilm to come out and be like, this is the correct version and none of the other ones are the right one, and especially if it kind of contradicts what Lucas originally at least appeared to intend that to mean. But I think if they have multiple interpretations of it, you can have a bunch of characters believe as many things as they want, whatever justifies the means to the end for their beliefs. So, thanks for sending that in, and thanks for bringing that back up. Anthony also says, "Great episode overall, even though it was short. I loved how Jod used a lightsaber, and it seems he knows how to use it. So I think he is a Jedi survivor, but I would say he is not a Jedi. He has abandoned or the Jedi ways for sure, and seems to have no interest in becoming one again. Or you think Jod could join Luke's new Jedi Order and be like a canon version of Kip Duron?" So overall, I agree. I'm glad the lightsaber came back. I forgot about it until that moment in the episode when he uses it to slice SM-33. I thought that was really cool, and I'm really glad it came back into the fold. I don't necessarily I still don't 100% believe he is a Jedi survivor. I think one of the things that's gonna come up with him is the way he was raised. He seems to be very vindictive against the kids in this episode because of where they're from and how they were brought up. He calls them spoiled children here. So I think he still seems to have something in his past that is holding him back from accepting a life of peace that makes him have this drive to constantly put himself in danger and heighten moments where he has to figure out, how to make his life constantly better, and that he has that drive and that desire to constantly take things and beat other people. And so I don't necessarily know if that. I mean, it could come from surviving Order 66 and surviving. We talked a few episodes ago about the fact, like, how old he would be, just comparing kind of Jude Law's age to what a Jod's like youngest age could be. I think like youngest Jod could be in his early 40s, maybe mid 40s, but Jude Law is in his 50s, so it I think he's a little bit closer to that. And if he was those ages, he would have survived Order 66. He would have been through Order 66. Um, but you could have also had him be the child of a Jedi who did survive. You could have had him be the child of a Jedi who left the Order because of having a child, something like that, and ultimately lost his parents and was forced to come up on his own, basically, and be through all these pirates and survive the pirates and learn to defend for himself. So I'm still not sold, even if he. I don't. I didn't get anything from this episode that made me think, oh yeah, he really knows how to use a lightsaber. I just saw a guy swinging a lightsaber, but he does, have a little bit more command than some characters recently we've seen. Whether it be like a Sabine who still seems to be struggling with it after training for a while and even training in Rebels, or some other characters who we've seen just pick up a lightsaber for the first time in Star Wars recently. Mandalorian with, like, carrying it like it's really heavy constantly with the dark saber. So he does seem to wield it a little bit better than them. So I'm not putting out the possibility that he has wielded a lightsaber before. But I still don't necessarily think that this episode convinced me he's someone who survived Order 66. Very well could be. Wouldn't be shocked if he is, but nothing from what I saw told me, yeah, that's the only possibility for Jod's backstory.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind him being a descendant of someone who's a Jedi. I just don't know if I want to see him be an Order 66 survivor at this point, especially because I do feel like we're running down a path of not being able to redeem him, right? Like, even characters that have fallen, who've had their Order 66 moments, or at least major fallouts with the Jedi around that time period, you understand them, you have sympathized with them, you can see where they're coming from. there is a level of empathy for what they're feeling, but you can't at the end of the day say like, "Oh, this is an irredeemable person that I wanna flip." Like, it is in a way so wrong and yet so right that both Vader and Kylo do such terrible things, and yet the Force wills them to their redemption because of doing the one good act at the right time that was needed, right? So I think if you look at Jod and how he's been characterized, kinda going from a little slimy, but meaning well, especially with these kids, kinda giving his time, lending an ear, to where he is now, where like, "I hate you guys. I can't believe I tolerated you guys for so long. You all are just yapping and such a nuisance," right? Like, how could anyone in any any part of the Star Wars universe and history say such terrible things to Neil? I mean, come on, right? Like, no, but to be serious, like, he has only continuously gone down this path, but he hasn't done anything that's like, "Oh, man, I've done it out of pain." He's done it out of greed, he's done it out of his selfishness, he's done it out of passion, he's done it out of all these things that are kinda in that grayish area of feelings where it's selfish, but it's not necessarily evil or coming from a place of hurt, or at least that we can see actively is coming from a place of hurt. So, I think the really interesting point of this episode is that like you're expecting a redemption. This is Star Wars. You're expecting someone who has some lesser qualities per se to do the right thing, to make a turnaround. And again, he's still good. I really wouldn't mind that. But I think the point here is that, sometimes when you see someone who could be a hero, who could be something great, you make assumptions about them and then they're kinda not, and I'd like to see him continue stepping into this path where ultimately he might just be arrested by the New Republic or the AT-AT security forces and thrown in a jail, and that's the end of his story, but it's a very, very valuable life lesson about what you expect from adventure, what you expect from the people you're gonna meet across the way, and how they can all kind of find some fall somewhere in the middle, and that's in some ways a lot harder to digest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, as your comment about Kip Duron pertains, they're both very, very different. Obviously, Jod still hasn't done anything that's near what Kip Duron did, and
Right,
he was redeemed. Star Wars has shown us so many times that pretty much anybody can be redeemed, especially if you want to look at Legends,
yeah,
where Luke kind of redeemed almost everybody. But one of the great things about Legends that I did appreciate was that even a lot of those characters that were redeemed, like a Kip, they still struggled with that their whole lives, like
right,
into the new Jedi Order and stuff like that. They carried the weight of those decisions and they didn't fully change. Like Kip, yeah, he was a good guy, but he came at it from a completely different perspective in Luke, so much so that there's basically a schism between the order by the time you get to the beginning of Vector Prime. There's a big schism between Luke's philosophy and Kip's philosophy and how the Jedi should act as guardians of peace and justice. So uh, a character like Jod, I could see I don't think I could see him ever joining anything, but could he act as like a free agent kind of thing? Like somebody who, if he had his own pirate crew, could a Luke or somebody call upon him as an ally in the future, i.e., kind of like an early Talon card where you didn't really know where his loyalties lie, kind of out for himself. But when push comes to shove, you could call on him for help. I think that's a possibility for a direction for Jod, but it depends on how he handles the situation. I don't think anybody in Star Wars is completely irredeemable, but yeah, he did treat Neil wrongly. So we'll see what he does next episode,
never,
but he's certainly
never
out
good.
for himself. And then we've got a couple super chats. Thank you guys so much for sending in the super chats. Again, tonight's stream will be about an hour and a half to 2 hours. If you want to make sure you get your comment on tonight's stream, send in a super chat. Greatly helps the channel and it gets your comment answered first. Starting with David Fieldson, who sent in a super chat and said the contrast at the vault of Jod with the gold versus the kids with their parents, and which was the real treasure, was good writing and well done. I agree. I think a lot of that is also on the acting too. Like the way Jude Law delivers that scene, the way he kind of breaks down when he sees the treasure. And this is a guy that, if we, recall the first episode, gets mutinied because he constantly is taking his crew to places where there's no treasure or the treasure's gone or there's barely any treasure, and it's usually his fault. Is his bad information. It's they're too late every time. And so just the fact that for the first time seemingly in his life, he has actually found the treasure he's looking for. I thought that was a really great moment. And then just have that switch flip and he's like basically ready to do whatever it takes to protect the treasure. Again, not really sure how like what happens to him in that moment after. I hope the next episode picks up immediately there because there's a guy holding a lightsaber standing by a bunch of families and all these droids and all these guards, the super high tech vaults. I would imagine he doesn't get very far, but maybe there's something they flip on, with the fact that this is an old Republic facility. Maybe they think he's a Jedi. They play with that a little bit next episode. He can kind of convince them that he's a Jedi, not just an emissary, but he's also a Jedi. I think that would be interesting if they are able to pull those things together. But yeah, I completely agree. That was some of the best nonverbal acting and some of the one of the darker sequences for sure across this entire show.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how he gets his way into a better situation for some himself. I don't really see him like walking them down, be like, let's have our own Anakin Order 66 Nightfall moment here. It's like that's not happening. But yeah, I do think that the way he's been wielding it, like it's not stiff or anything, but it seems fairly elegant. It's not really swashbuckler per se, but I do think that is ultimately what they're trying to go for.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's almost like he makes a big mention in this episode, like, oh, it's always good to have a hostage, right? So perhaps he's gonna use that and use them against the droids. Because look, at the end of the day, the droids, even if they're like stunning them, the parents, and like enforcing these rules and all that, I don't think their prime directives are to like harm them and like kill and outright do that. So by like taking them hostage, and he's like, all right, if you don't take me to the next 1,138 vaults, one each one of these people die for each vault that you don't like open up for me, right? I can totally see that being a bargaining chip. Because at the end of the day, like he says in that episode when they're in Renan's lair, he's like, no, it's not about killing and all that. It's about money. That's you don't really know what a pirate is, right? Because you haven't lived that life. So I don't think he has any intention of actually trying to kill them. He's obviously very annoyed by all of them. But in front of their family and all that, like even if his heart is cold, I don't think it's that cold, right? So I think it's just more like that's the only thing, like you said, David, that matters to him. Like that's what he imagines treasure to be. But
Hmm.
I don't think this system in place with all these vaults that, curiously, Wim's dad, Wendell, and kind of like insinuates is like, you weren't old enough yet to find out that this is kind of how the system is in place and why it's in place, right? Like I think there's more to it, and I think he's not gonna be prepared for that. But his best bargaining chip is to say, okay, well, I'm just gonna take lives now. I'm gonna pretend that I will. But he is a pirate at the end of the day. He's not really that messed up. Sure, he killed Brutus, but I think that's more like years and years of pent up frustration with this guy who's always talking and bad mouthing him. And he's finally gotten back to his crew, and they pretty easily supported him. So he yes, but I don't think that would work for a finale.
Yeah, I don't think it would either. But yeah, it begs the question about the supervisor still. I mean, they did
Yeah.
actually, I went and looked and wrote it down because they did put the actor who voiced the supervisor in the credits, and it's Stephen Fry, who's a British comedian, um, also an older gentleman around 70 years old. So the Tack Rented theory kind of could still be out there if Tack Rented was a pirate who could still be alive at the time. So I don't know if Stephen Fry might just be the voice, could also be the supervisor in the next episode when we eventually see him. So I'm very interested to see where that goes and how that connects to the information we did get from the parents in this episode because the parents seem to know more than we kind of thought they did. We thought they were a little more in the dark. It seems like they're not that much in the dark. I mean, they still don't seem to know exactly who the supervisor is or what he does. when you get the supervisor talking in this episode, it is just an emblem that pops up in the hologram. But he talks very nonchalantly, kind of like he does this a lot. Like from what we have seen previously, it seemed more like the supervisor was almost a recluse. Here, it seems like he's used to making these public announcements and just kind of talking with everybody, but he doesn't make too many appearances. But the parents don't seem to be questioning much about who the supervisor is as much as like we are as the audience. So I feel like they know a little more than we thought they did, but also they don't necessarily know maybe the extent of what he's done in the past or what he's doing. So it'll be interesting to see if that all kind of unfolds. I think if it was Captain Rennet, it would be, interesting to see both a newer generation pirate and the living legend pirates kind of going at it in the next episode. So we'll see. And I wouldn't put it past the idea of even Captain Rennet having the Force or being able to use the Force, kind of being an inverse Jod or similar to Jod down the same path. They could do something interesting there. But yeah, thank you so much for the super chat, David. And we appreciate the comment. Anthony also sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, Anthony, for supporting tonight's show. Anthony says, I think that Skywalker means agent of balance, which is why Rey took the name. Rey does not undo Anakin's sacrifice. Rey was used by Anakin. She was his champion to preserve the balance he created. It's an interesting perspective, Anthony, and I think they'll continue to play around with it. I mean, especially after hearing people's criticisms of the Rise of Skywalker, they've obviously taken now going on 6 years to follow that story up. And if the reports of the constant change of talent behind the scenes are to be believed, we might be waiting a while longer to see what they come up with as the legacy of Rey. But I do think they're actively searching for ways they can kind of patch it up and make it so that she didn't completely damage the chosen one prophecy of Anakin Skywalker. But I think regardless of how you do it, it's going to make people upset. Obviously, appreciate your perspective. And I think that's kind of what the movie is going for. Obviously, it's done in a way, especially by making her a Palpatine. I think it is less offensive to the Skywalker legacy and a way if she was not a Palpatine, if she was just another nobody like Anakin was, who rises up and was chosen by the Force to be that next champion. But the fact that she's kind of, they try to do this, inverse thing of like, oh, what if the greatest villain became the greatest hero? And it's a trope we've seen before. It wasn't ultimately that creative, but I do think that's where the lines start to get blurred. You need more lore around both her and her family. A little bit more. I mean, what we know of Dathan's escape in Shadow of the Sith, kind of need a little bit more around that, his creation around the Strandcast clones and all of what Palpatine was doing. But I appreciate your perspective. Thanks for sharing, and thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I do agree with what you're saying, Anthony. I do think that's the intention. It really is just a matter of execution, and we would have been in a much better place. And I'll harp on it every day until I see a Rey's New Jedi Order film and whatever series of films are planning for her to be featured in, to like really flesh out her journey and continue making her important in her own way, making sure Finn actually gets his deserved role as a whatever he is, right? Not just a stormtrooper rebellion leader, but his own individual Jedi or militant Jedi or his own kind of thing. We don't know, right? So yeah, I think it's because of execution that doesn't necessarily work. But I've always actually kind of been fine with it being a Palpatine. I just wish that there were actual threads connecting it or teasing it, that possibility that in some ways maybe would have been ignored. So like, oh, like no, 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 she's a nobody. But what about this lingering thread? Like, why is that out there? Why are we getting some very suspicious camera work or something like that, right? So it's not. Obviously, you can flesh that out with we're starting off with the Kylo Ren comic that's coming out. We're starting off with the Rise of Skywalker comic adaptation, which I think you also mentioned is going to start bringing in some new elements like the Fortnite speech is finally going to be used in some way besides Fortnite. But again, it's an execution. It is now about making it better. And I think it'll work because we've also already taken huge steps already by bringing Hayden back, and not just for Obi-Wan Kenobi, but for Ahsoka, which I think is going to be more important for the journey of that character as a Force ghost. We've seen
Mhm.
already that, we've gotten some very interesting direction with what Anakin is going to be like with Shadow the Sith. He's not just going to be a peaceful ghost that's just, unbound and able to, live between time and space in peace. No, there's things that he will hurt him, that will affect him. I'm sure Palpatine can play a role there and all that. It's going to be more fantastical. It's going to be maybe go even more mythological than Star Wars already is. And I think that's what's going to be ultimately important, because if you do want Rey to be this champion, I think you have to also play into considerations that, like, not only is she this champion that's come from the evil counterpart of the Skywalkers, you also have to like bring in like maybe some residual elements of Ben Solo, and what's going on with him, if he's like tied to her essence, her soul in some ways, right? I think you have to do that for sure. Uh, I definitely will say though, for me personally, I need to see Anakin and the continuity there, like, without a doubt, without a doubt. Like it's just, if we don't see Anakin's journey and we don't see the influence that he will have on Rey and possibly Ben Solo if he's alive in some way, then I think it's all for naught, right? I think if you're just gonna be like, oh, it's just Anakin's successor, it could have just been a by blood Skywalker at that point. So that would be my only argument. But make a connection where like he's on his own journey, but there are things that he's influencing about hers before her journey even begins, and then once her journey's well underway, once Episode 9 is complete, what is his role? He's not just gonna disappear. I don't think we're gonna ever return to like that heir to the empire idea of like, hey, Obi-Wan's soul is gonna like disappear in a little bit. Just get used to that. It's like, no, I don't think so. I think we're gonna have Force Ghosts be explored. We're gonna see some more interesting things coming out of that stuff. So just make it as connected. Play off the fact that everyone loves the prequels now, and we've actually seen redemption for these actors. And you'll see that start to happen with the sequels by fleshing out the stuff there and building it out to be an era, and then making Rey go on her own journey with all the other trilogy characters that absolutely deserve that.
Anthony says, I'm excited to see if episode 8 has any connections to the Mandoverse. I'm excited for the Rise of Skywalker. Okay, that's a different comment. I'll get to that after. I'm excited to see that too. This episode was kind of leaning towards the idea of the fact that there was this kind of uh, almost keeper of the path to Atten in the previous Republic and the old Republic. Um,
Mhm.
and maybe into the Republic that fell before the Empire. So, be interesting to see if that is like a role that exists out there in the Mandoverse, that it is being kept like as this like legacy for a family to have be the keeper of the path to Atten. Um, but I don't know how many other connections there will be to Mandoverse outside of that. I predicted last week in our predictions, and I still kind of hold by it, that they might have to turn to the New Republic for help. It depends on, they still don't seem like the parents and stuff, they still don't seem to actually know that there is a new government out there.
Yeah.
So they're still in the dark about that. It'll be interesting to see if the New Republic has a way of tracking the pirates to Atten, or if somebody has to escape and then the kids tell the parents, hey, there's this New Republic out there, there's these X-wings, these people who can help us, maybe we can get a communication through the barrier, we can contact them and they can come help us with the pirates. um, Something like that, or if the supervisor has to turn to the New Republic for help. But I think something in that vein. I'm at best expecting maybe a Carson Teva or somebody of that nature to show up at best. I still don't think it's a huge, like, locked in guarantee, but I think it's going to be somebody of that nature. I don't think it's going to be like Din Djarin shows up in the next episode and he's like, "Oh, I've been hunting these pirates for 2 years. Finally found them. I'm going to kill them." I don't think it's going to be something that big. I think if there is a connection, it'll be something a little smaller. Maybe the X-Wings show back up because the X-Wings have been recurring. But we'll see. We'll see what connections they do make, I think regardless, by the end of the show, Atten will kind of be revealed to the rest of the galaxy, and that will obviously make it highly susceptible to whoever wants to come after the treasure, both good, bad, and otherwise. So it'll be interesting to see how they tie that in with the grander conflict around Thrawn and Ahsoka and Din Djarin and what's going to be happening in the next Mandoverse thing, which is Mandalorian and Grogu.
I mean, we have precedents in a lot of ways, right? Like in Legends, we know like there are dark times, quite literally, like with the new Sith Wars, where the galaxy is devastated. Things that were known for a previous era of the Republic kind of comes into play in the present day or the New Republic. So it's definitely there for like long, long stretches, especially since we're kind of hearing this to be a little bit more Old Republic coded than a High Republic coded. And, you know, it could still be High Republic, but I think the High Republic connection will be like, oh no, like the New Republic's been able to manage to recover old Republic codes and old insignias and information and data. And it just stored there from whatever we recovered from Coruscant and all that. And it's just like all the High Republic stuff. And we have very direct precedents here in canon too, because in the Star Wars 2020 line, there is like an entire thing of like, okay, we kind of have to become like these Navajo code breakers because the Empire keeps on catching us up. The fleet was split up. Not all of them survived, even though most of us were united. How do we keep our communication strong and make sure that we can all stay connected? And they have to go recover a High Republic droid on Coruscant and use High Republic code and everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is similar, just in the opposite way. It's like this was just always there with the Old Republic. It wasn't something that they made out of it. It just is. And the New Republic has been able to recover it thanks to efforts like Luke going to Coruscant, finding the old Jedi temple there, for Jocasta New buried years and years ago. Maybe we get to see other people, other characters be like, "Oh yeah, this was just Han took a mission, Orlando, and they found some incredible treasure, but then they also found all this useless junk, and it's kind of light up on our computers, and that's how we found you, and we connected all the dots with the pilots, with all these little things that we've been hearing and all that." So yeah, it's pretty interesting, and I kind of want to tie in like David Fields and how he takes the contrast of the parents and the kids, and that's that treasure, like the meaning and the value it has to them, and what Jod sees in that gold. I think very similarly, you can look at in the same way. We've seen this huge, great barrier, right? And we don't really see that when the kids are leaving. We just see dots, maybe some swirls and all that. But this is our first time seeing Atten, and it seems like a huge, almost like gaseous giant, like at least huge rumbling storms, which doesn't really match what we know, even if it is like a mirage. And then when you actually go through there, go through all those layers, you see like a relatively small planet, right? And I think that's going to be the same way, like with the parents and their knowledge, right? The world that they live in feels a lot bigger for the kids, but it's the structure, it's the system that they've once they reach like adulthood, I guess, on at Atten, they become aware of it. This is why they've been trained their whole lives, all this and that. But like Liam was saying, they always say, like, even in this episode, they're like, make sure to contact the Republic. Their worldview is so much smaller in comparison to the rest of the citizens of the galaxy. So what they know and what they're gonna find out, I think it's gonna be shocking for them too. So, and I think it's that barrier being so big and then seeing the actual planet and how much of a gap there is between that. I think that's gonna like play really well as like just like a lot of the visual metaphors or visual hints that we're kind of getting for knowledge, getting for awareness and what is the truth and like what is kind of just the mythology, the big dream, the kind of the just the whole verbiage around making something feel bigger and glorious and huge when it's in reality, this is just what it is. And how being in these different situations and being where you kind of stand kind of points out to you like, oh, there is a bigger, 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 and bigger galaxy and so many more things that they're just not aware of.
Anthony sent in another super chat. Thank you so much, Anthony, for supporting tonight's show. Anthony said, I have a feeling Dathan was physically and mentally abused by his father, and that's why he hated his father. Do you think he was a nobody because he knew the galaxy would despise him more than anyone? Well, we know Dathan's journey, at least kind of in summary, in Shadow of the Sith. We obviously know his end very detailed. but we get his backstory, how he disappears off of Exegol in that book, and he was he was abused, at least mentally, because everybody hated him because he wasn't force sensitive. Not I can't remember if they explain why they didn't just kill him after knowing he wasn't force sensitive, because that seems like something
Yeah.
Palpatine would have done. But he escapes on like a shipment out of Exegol, if I remember correctly, and nobody really cared because he didn't have force sensitive sensitivity. So they just kind of were like, "Yeah, whatever. He's gone." So that's kind of what we know about his past, and then he met Miramir. But I would imagine he does lay low, obviously, because of his connection to Palpatine, since he is a clone. Even if it failed experiment, but he's a Strandcast clone. I don't know We don't know exactly what that kind of means in terms of his looks,
Yeah.
but you would imagine he would look pretty close to Palpatine, so eventually he's gonna look like the Emperor, and, I think that would, be a problem, for him, later in his life. Palpatine seems to have been a little more famous, obviously, in his, like, 50s onwards when he was Senator of Naboo and then eventually Chancellor and Emperor, so, maybe people don't recognize him when Dathan is in his, like, late 20s, early 30s when he dies. So I don't know. There's still kind of need to clarify a bit more about that, but ultimately, maybe less so than abuse. It was more neglect. Nobody really cared about him. They just kind of dumped him after he proved to be
Yeah.
not force sensitive.
Yeah, Adam Christopher, it's pretty sparse with the details, but it's just more like once they figured out there's nothing to be of value of this kid, right? It's like, all right, he was just left to the side. Like it's a Sith Eternal Acolyte's got no time for him. Palpatine obviously keeps on dying over and over through these clone bodies. So the Strandcast was the next step. It was the step past cloning, right? It's like, what are we gonna do by bringing in that Luke's hand, bringing in Force artifacts, Sith alchemy, all this and that, the latest technology possible, and that's yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree that Dathan will have to look like Palpatine because we've seen the actor for Palpatine. I just don't see how in any way, or for Dathan, I just don't see how he match up Ian McDermott, but maybe he does. Maybe there's a period of his life where he looks fairly close to him, but I think the idea of the Strandcast is that they can kind of pick and choose and put the best, the worst, and unintended consequences, appearances can kind of be one of those things. That's how I've always looked at it compared to cloning, where it is a literal one-to-one. And I think that probably plays into why they don't care as much, right? If they saw a Palpatine clone, if we got sort of I forget the actor's name. Is it Adam, the guy, the 11th Doctor, from Doctor Who? I'm forgetting his name. He was in Madam Web as well, or not Madam Web, but he was Morbius.
Oh,
I'm
Matt
blanking.
Smith.
Matt Smith. I was saying Adam
Yeah.
Smith. That's like some like felt yeah, it's early like 1700s guy, but yeah, Matt Smith, right? Like if we'd gone with Matt Smith as like an acolyte or even like a direct descendant, or like a young clone, then I think just that visual of like, oh, a Palpatine in his prime, but without the Force, that would have been like something to be abused and neglected. And Palpatine would have very directly done it himself, and maybe use Snoke every once in a while, right, taking over his mind. And that's still not out of the picture. I think there's enough sparseness in that writing that you could just be like, Dathan just doesn't remember because abuse was just that insane with it, especially because it was all Force augmented, right? And I always preferred the idea of it like being like the House of Palpatine on Exegol, where it's not just like everyone's in this big massive tomb. There is like politics. There is like almost like a feudalistic system in place, especially because of how fantastical already the process of keeping Palpatine alive over and over again is. And you can lean into that, I think, to some degree still, but yeah, I think it's just more that Dathan is just neglected and left alone. I mean, even his name isn't his name. It's just who he picks up from his best friend, who is
Mhm.
like just like one of the slave class on Exegol. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Anthony. I just think there isn't enough what we've seen from Shadow of the Sith to absolutely say that like, oh, Palpatine had enough time on his hands, constantly dying and living again, and trying to rework his body to the fullest potential to be like, "Hey, son, you're a disappointment." Slap, punch, force lightnings. Like, nah, I just think it's more like whatever. He was a waste. I'll use him later for like like, if maybe we can use it for another Strand cast, like, pull out material as needed, rip him apart into the different strips that he was originally formed from. I think that's more of, like, wait and see approach, and then the abuse probably would have been crazy then.
Mrs. Mandarin sent in a super chat. Thank you so much for supporting tonight's show. Mrs. Mandarin says, I'm enjoying Skeleton Crew. I like the writing, storytelling, curious to find out who the supervisor is, Jod's background, and real identity of parents. Yeah, those are the mysteries left on the table. Again, the supervisor was in tonight's episode for the first time. We got his voice, and it was performed by Stephen Fry, who's a British comedian. You'd probably recognize his face if you look him up. I wish we had a way to kind of show you guys what he looked like, but we don't right now. But yeah, look him up, Stephen Fry with a PH. That is who's playing the supervisor, at least the voice. Could be changed, obviously, for next episode. But he was in as a reference, he was in The Hobbit, in my least favorite role in the entire movie. Nothing against Stephen Fry, but he was the master of Lake Town in The Hobbit,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
really not a role I liked. But but or maybe the worst version or the worst character was his assistant. Was yeah, that character was awful. So Master Lake Town a little bit better, but I'm sure Stephen Fry will be great in this if he is actually the face of the supervisor, and that would kind of go with more of the Wizard of Oz type thing that we've talked about in the past, and people have brought back up in the chat of this kind of older guy who's hiding behind this technology, these droids, uh, the advanced technology of Atten, and just kind of running things from the background, being a little bit more important than he actually having a little bit more power than he really physically possesses. But we'll see if that's the angle they actually go. If he could be somebody else of note, or he just is a guy who was assigned to to run at and he's really not that important. But I tend to think since they haven't shown his face for 7 episodes that he's going to be somebody of note in some fashion. It's just a matter of what he is and who he what he does. And then along with Jod's backstory, I'm very interested in Jod's backstory as well. I don't know if the show gets into it much beyond just him dropping a line maybe in next episode when he's yelling at somebody and say, my parents left me, or I survived Order 66, or whatever it is that he did to hone his skills, to grow. I don't think we're going to really see it in depth. If we do see it, it's going to be quick because that's how these shows usually are. But hopefully next episode we get some type of clue about who he is. Again, if we never do, I think that's okay for Jod. I think it's okay for him to just be this wild card who discovered he had the Force and lived in the Outer Rim and nobody cared, and Palpatine didn't make it that far. And he just has been left to fend for himself his entire life and honed his skills because he had to survive. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most satisfying answer, but I'm okay with that. But I do really want to find out the supervisor's role and what who he is and who he's related to, or how he's connected to the Old Republic, or how he's connected to Tack Rennet, if that's the case. But something next episode about the supervisor, I would almost guarantee we get some answer about that.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of the same thoughts, same feelings toward the show and everything that we kind of seen. Miss Mandarin, nice to see you again. Yeah, I mean, I am really enjoying Skeleton Crew. It's not like a crazy like surprise as we got out of Andor. It was like, why are we doing a show about the guy who dies in Rogue One? To like, oh my god, this might be the definitive, most honestly, probably the most left wing Star Wars show that even Lucas probably couldn't have written because he's so much more whimsical and fantastical. Like that gets into the politics, that gets into like humanity and like choices against fighting fascism and all that. Like it's insane. Star Wars always had the building blocks for it, but to have it play out that well, to that budget, to that level of acting and direction. Yeah, that's still I don't think season 2 will touch it. I think it'll be pretty dang good, but season 1, just with how paced it is and all that, and it taking place over a year, it's like, yeah, it's an insane show, and I don't think Star Wars is prepared to do that for every single Star Wars show, but this was a good surprise, like and I think the biggest surprise for me was just how much I enjoyed the kids acting. I think every generation, kids get better and better, obviously child actors it's still a thankless job. Like, there are things that happen to them that shape their lives, and behind the scenes on camera, on sets, shapes them their lives with the fame, the level of internet celebrity these days too. So, yeah, that I'm glad that from what I can tell, the kids have been fairly well protected, and they're they had a guiding hand in Jude Law, kind of being their companion. So yeah, I think he helped them out, and it really shows because they're very confident in their direction. They had an all-star cast of directors too, so a helping hand all along the way to really make sure that their performance worked. And I think it's definitely improved week by week. And this is another example of like, okay, now that they've got the chemistry together, not that they're not two separate groups, bam, like, wow, look at them having fun and all that. Like, it feels so well earned, and I have to give kids so much credit because you can say those lines, right? But to actually make us feel it, like, that takes effort no matter what. That takes a level of skill, and yeah, I think they've done really well there. The story for me, I'm a little iffier on, especially because this feels like this could have been a great, like, 12-episode show with a little bit more episodic stuff going on. Just the nature of 8 episodes on Disney Plus, on most streaming sites, right? And with these, like Liam said, up and down run times, it does limit just how much detail and richness that some of these scenes and, the emotional depth that they're trying to carry actually can manage, right? And for me, I think the storytelling, it hasn't faltered anywhere, but it's lacking with the parents. And I wish they had a bit of a bigger role, especially because this was Disney's, like, way of, like, bringing in the Stranger Things formula, bringing in the Goonies of the old, and bringing in Star Wars formula where they can all blend together and create something new, and they have. I cannot deny that they have. They've done the right thing where they're not leeching new Star Wars from just old Star Wars, but, like, other inspirations, other pop culture and all that. But if you're gonna make a very concrete statement about, like, "Oh, we're looking for kids in, like, a Stranger Things-esque show," and hiring, like, pretty strong character actors for the adults, do a little bit more for the adults. Like, yeah, I'm still a little disappointed that is literally it came off as very childish that they're like, "Okay, we're gonna do, like, a 4 by 400 race where I run 40 feet meters, get stunned. Okay, and then you get the next 100 meters. Okay, you get the next 100 until Farah manages to let it go up in the air," right? It's like I think that scene works, but why not spend a little bit of time, like, with the parents, trying again, seeing a little bit more of that and getting a little bit more of the perspective, their eyes, their version of the planet, like we have with the kids. Like, the kids are, like, making references like, "Oh, yeah, like, back on at Akron, like, this is very similar, like, the autopilot sequence here." The kids stuff has always been fleshed out well for me. It's the adult stuff that I'm like, I really thought episode 7 would be way, way more, and instead, it's like, okay, they're gonna obviously be kinda combined here because 'cause they're all together now, but are they gonna really get to shine in the same way that the kids have? No, not really, and the only way to, like, lessen that blow really is for the pirates to play a big role, to get some nice Mandoverse connection, and to have Jod continue to be that wild card where now I'm not even really sure which way he'll land, and I'm excited for that more than anything else.
Another thing I was disappointed with the parents thing too is just like I can't really tell what the rules around anything are in Atten from
Yeah.
this episode. Like this is the second time they've been captured for trying to get communications out or disobeying the rules. But yet they're allowed to go just visit their kids at the end and come down to the vaults of all places, which you would think would be like this super secret, like special thing. And they
Right.
just kind of appear and they're not even really guarded by anybody. Um, but before they're like standing on the lawn, so they're able to like run outside. I found a lot of that stuff just kind of confusing. Like, so are they in trouble? Are they not? I mean, even just
Yeah.
one scene where like a droid comes and is like, "You guys are great employees, so we'll let you off this time, but you can't be doing this anymore." Just anything like that. And that's the type of stuff that I just say like there's no excuse for not making this a 40-minute episode. It does not hurt the show in any way if this was longer. And that's where I think that's what's most frustrating about these things is like we're not at 45 minutes and saying, "Man, oh, I just want I maybe they should make it 50," or we're not at 50 minutes and we're like, "Maybe they should make it over an hour." It's like, the most popular shows on TV are HBO shows that are all 55 minutes to an hour or more. A lot of these shows, it's not just like our show makes great show. That's not what I want people to think I'm saying, because
Yeah.
that's completely untrue. You can have 30-minute episodes, it can all be great, right? But I think it is just the contrast in these lengths. You have 40 minutes here, then you have 25 here, then you have 50 here. There's no real consistency in the storytelling. And it's like these Star Wars shows, especially, kind of pick and choose when they want to be detailed about something and when they don't. And when they don't really want to get into it, or they're like, nobody will want to know all the details about what's going on at, and let's just cut all that. It really does feel like it's chopped. And that's what the Acolyte felt like a lot. The Acolyte was a little worse just because it had such a big story and so many characters. It
Yeah.
really felt chopped to the bone. This doesn't feel as chopped to the bone. It just feels like, instead of giving us a little more details, they decide, let's just keep it for kids, and just like things happen. And then we don't need to explain it. It's just a kid's show. Um, I think that's what's a little disappointing. But I agree with you, Mrs. Mandarin. I mean, we can have a show like Skeleton Crew, and we can have Andor. I've enjoyed Skeleton Crew overall. I think it was a big surprise. But I think we can also similarly have justifiable expectations in the fact that, like, we're on episode 7. It's no longer a surprise show. It's no longer a surprise that the show is good. We should kind of be expecting a little more. We should be expecting to get better. And not that it's gotten worse, but it's kind of just stayed at the same spot for me, where
Yeah.
I liked the first couple episodes, wasn't anticipating the show, but I thought I would like it more because I wasn't anticipating the show. I did really enjoyed those first 2 episodes, but it's kind of just stayed a flat level for me, like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 every week. And it's only occasionally gone up or down, uh, maybe a couple fives, but like, it's just a standard show. Whereas I'd hoped that it could grow legs and really take off in the second half. But overall, I mean, just the fact that we're talking positively about a Star Wars show is a positive after the first half of this year and a lot of the disappointments, or I mean, in 2024, and a lot of this disappointments we had across 2024 and 2023. I think just the fact that this is a consistently good show, even if it never is great, is still in a lot of ways a positive, even if that's not really where we want to be with Star Wars. We want every show to be great, but I think it is a positive that it's at least a solid show. Just here's hoping to them sticking the landing. How
Yeah.
many shows have missed in that finale? Not Star Wars has been better than Marvel in finales, but how many shows have missed in the finale? So really hope they stick the landing on this one. And I have more faith because John Watts is directing the finale, and he's the guy that co-created the show, co-wrote the show. So uh, got some faith, but we will see. But we are running behind here on the chats. We're over an hour into the stream, hour and 10 minutes into the stream. So again, this is going to go an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the flow of the conversation. We're not very far into the chat. So if you want to make sure you get a chat on tonight's show, send in a super chat. As you guys have seen with all the super chats we've answered so far, we will answer that one first. Then we will get to the rest. First come, first serve. Hopefully we can get through as many as possible. Also started a poll. I did this last week. I forgot to start it at the beginning of the stream, but 20 of you guys have already voted in it. But let us know what you guys thought of Skeleton Crew. Did you think it was great, good, average, bad? Let us know in the chats there. And scrolling back up to where we left off, which was, I believe, Anthony again saying, I'm excited for the Rise of Skywalker comic. It's supposed to have new details not seen in the movie, and I'm excited to see the Legacy of Vader comics. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't excited for Rise of Skywalker comic just because I don't really ever read those adaptations. They're usually just the exact same thing as the movie, but just shrunk down immensely. But if it does have some details, like Sanak was mentioning, I didn't know it was going to finally have the Fortnite speech in there for us to see on page. I might check it out now if there are a lot of extra details. But yeah, thanks for that comment.
Yeah. I expect to see very minimal big changes, but since it was canceled and then brought back, yeah, take some stuff that's in the novel, at a, novelization of the movie, right? Take some stuff that isn't other material surrounding everything we know about the Rise of Skywalker and put it in here and juice up a little bit, right? I know there was a whole cut scene with Eye of the Whippish Bog. I don't think that will happen. I think that's gonna be saved for and moved up a little bit in the timeline to what we see in Legacy of Vader, right? So maybe nothing too big like that, but like these smaller things that are like, why did it not get like a moment in the film, right? like at least a nod to a different story or something, that's good enough for me. I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan of any of these adaptation comics
Mhm.
of from a different medium, but as a completionist, it did definitely burn me a bit that it got
Yeah.
canceled. And I know it was mostly COVID and everything that really kicked it into gear permanently, it seemed. But the fact that it's back, I'm happy. I'm happy. I hope it's not like whatever they're adding is going to be like such a huge cost, sunken cost sort of thing that they have to do now. I hope they had all the art ready and they just started to tweak a little bit of the dialogue and just maybe add a new panel here and there.
And I think it is nice to have sat on this for a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if I don't know who's writing the comic. Do you know, Cynic? But
Uh, I don't know who's writing it. I think Phil Noto's doing the art, or I don't know.
But
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see if the writer had any contact with maybe like a Chris Terrio or somebody involved with Rise of
yeah,
Skywalker now 5 years on, right? Maybe if they made any changes or additions or enhanced certain things, because the novelization is basically based on the shooting script, and it's always released like the same week or the week after the movie comes out. Especially I think it was week after for all the novelizations on Disney Star Wars movies. But yeah, so there's not much time to like reflect on the story and add things in that might actually like enhance it or really change it in any way, especially the way Disney approached novelizations. It was really just more of a obligation.
all
They
right.
didn't really enhance them like the prequel novelizations did. They were more like the original trilogy novelizations. The original trilogy novelizations a little more interesting because they're based on the shooting scripts, and George Lucas is infamous for changing so many things in the edit. So
Yeah,
they're kind of interesting as like a piece of what this would have looked like before George Lucas edited the movies, but they're not as in depth. But the prequel novelizations, he hired really prominent writers between Terry Brooks, R.A. Salvatore, and Matthew Stover to write the books, and they all said that they had direct interaction with him about writing and enhancing certain scenes. So anyway, went on a little rant there, but it'd be interesting to see if the writer of the Rise of Skywalker comic does actually kind of meet with maybe a Chris Terrio or J.J. Abrams and just kind of like, hey, what are some things about the movie now 5 years on that you would have liked changed or maybe clarified or enhanced in a certain way? And if they added that in 5 years later, I think that would be pretty cool. Most likely it's just this is what was written in 2020 and they just decided to publish it again. But
yeah,
we can hope. Mrs. Mandarin says, hey, I love the show, and I know people say it's a kiddie show, but I'm enjoying the show so much. I think it's a family show, and man, I thought this week's episode was good as well. I love the Captain music too. I also enjoyed the storylines and the characters, and I'm actually with the kids having an adventure. Completely agree. Enjoying the show immensely. I think it is a big surprise. Again, haven't absolutely loved anything in the show. I think it's had its moments. It hasn't had any real bad moments either, which is a positive. But overall, I've enjoyed the adventure. I was just hoping for something good. And I think this is good. No matter what happens in the last episode, I think overall I'm going to have a pretty positive opinion of Skeleton Crew. And I'm glad you're really enjoying it as well, Mrs. Mandarin.
yeah. I mean, this is a show like you were mentioning in some of your later comments. We can have an Andor be super intellectual, and then you can have this family show, this kid show, and Skeleton Crew, and I think that is a big success, right? Like so many Star Wars YouTubers, just so many people in general. Like our kid didn't really care about Star Wars when I put on like a New Hope or Phantom Menace or The Force Awakens, but I put on Skeleton Crew and they're like, when's the next episode, right? It's like they get to see other kids, maybe just a
Yeah.
couple years older than them, and they're attracted to that. They're attracted to the characters that genuinely do speak like kids instead of like pseudo intellectual kids that, especially with kid actors getting better and better, like they kind of deliver some lines that I'm like, no kid talks like that, right? It's just that's an adult writing for you, and it shows, right? So I think they've really nailed the balance of this being like, okay, like kids are leading this show. And if this is a show that's going to be led by the kids, and there have been rumors that there's so many different reshoots and they delayed everything to make sure everything was good, but they had a lot of difficulties with like making sure that the kids looked relatively close to the original shoot date and not how they are now, obviously changing and growing up. With all that, I'm been pretty impressed, right? Again, I'm a huge fan of John Knoll and what he's done with the visuals here. Like in some ways, like the new reborn Onyx Cinder kind of like gliding into the atmosphere and all that. That felt so good to me, right? And I think even a Mandalorian and Ahsoka both kind of struggled. And obviously, I think the rumor is that this show has a bigger budget than at least Ahsoka did. So yeah, I mean, they've done a lot visually that I've really loved about the show. They've done a lot with the kids that feels like kids in Star Wars is a possibility now instead of kind of the infamous history that we've had. All right, and it's so great on a side note hearing from Jake Lloyd again this past week and like how he's gone through his treatment and everything, and I think made some big breakthroughs and how he's planning for May 4th to get the Star Wars shirts out and catch up on all the shows and everything that he's missed out. Right now, he's playing like KOTOR and everything. So, you know, schizophrenia, media pressure, whatever it may be, like it was a horrible situation for him as a kid to come in, and with the franchise that is definitely made for kids first and foremost. uh, it's a shame that sometimes the fandom can be so ruthless to the people who are just doing what the adults are telling them to do, right? And this was a worry that I had, especially with the polarization of the world and everything. And these kids simply have won week after week, and I think other kids are seeing that. And if you don't bring kids to Star Wars, you're not going to have Star Wars continue. And I think this is huge for them. This will be the next real generation of kids, at least a small dedicated group for sure of kids getting into Star Wars because of this new thing releasing in Star Wars since basically The Force Awakens. So you can say the Mandoverse, but I think that was a little bit more nostalgia driven, and a lot more people in their 20s and 30s that really juiced that one up. But this, from what I can tell, it is really parents who are like surprised by their kids who are really enjoying it. And I think this opens a door for at least, a couple more moments of the kids, you know, getting to be a big role as actors, as creatives in the Star Wars universe. And, there's a rumor that like they're gonna play a role in the Mandoverse. And I know there's all those memes of like Filoni will bring in every single character. It's like, Neil, I need you to distract Thrawn right now or something. I don't think we'll ever have anything to that egregious example, but yeah, I wouldn't mind them popping up again in some side story, some animation, because I think kids who are growing up and seeing this and rewatching this every year, maybe getting a season 2 out of this, they wanna see these characters grow up with them. Who are we to say no? Just like when we had Ahsoka back during '08 Clone Wars.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's room for more adventures with this crew. I do want to see a season two. I think it could improve the whole thing. I mean, having these kids kind of take on the role of, not necessarily bad pirates, but kind of a traditional Hondo style pirate, more fun adventurers, maybe is a better
Yeah,
word, for Atten. That would be kind of fun. I think it would be cool. We'll see what they do. I think there are plenty of stories to tell. I would like to keep them a little separated from the rest of the Mandoverse. I do think it works a little bit better. I think they can be tied in, maybe at Atten or some of the locations, some of the lore that we learn in the show. Can definitely be tied into the Mandoverse, but I think these characters, I would imagine, in my opinion, fit much better on their own or with a certain
yeah.
side of the Star Wars universe rather than helping defeat a big evil. But
But Neil
yeah,
could do it. Neil could do it.
yeah, because Neil's a Sith Lord. No, you never know. But
The new Jorah
yeah, I would.
Sabath.
Yeah, oh god. That's what they're gonna probably do. No, I just wanna see more, from the innocence of the show. I think that's when it works best, when it's on its adventure, right? I think it just flesh it out a little more, add a little bit more to it, and I think you've got a great, great show here. But thanks for your comment, Mrs. Mandarin. Nate Coe says, "Do y'all think the supervisor is really Captain Renard?" That is one of my theories for sure. I think it's a strong possibility. I think the way the droid never says, because I saw that later in the chat, SM-33 never says how he was defeated. They just say he was defeated or left for dead on Atten or stranded on Atten. I forgot what the exact words he says are, but he never says he died. And they never say that like it's definitive that he's, gone. And he never definitively says when he was alive either. That just that he's a legendary pirate, right? So
Yeah.
if it is Stephen Fry that is playing him in live action, Stephen Fry again, he's I don't think he's an older gentleman. So I think he could play that role. Also British, so it would fit the sound of the voice. Like he could do the British pirate voice that we heard. He can also do the older kind of aged pirate. He also SM33 British pirate sounding voice, right? Like I think he could definitely do that. He's a character actor, a comedian. I think he could absolutely embody that role if that is the direction they're going. Doesn't I don't necessarily 100% buy into any specific theory, but I do think that's one that they've hyped up so much throughout the show, especially in the last 3, 4 episodes. It's really been all about, okay, who is this captain? Or what were his secrets? How did he do this or that? How did he get access to Atten? And now that we find out that the ship, the Onyx Cinder, in this episode is from Atten and that he was going to use it to escape Atten. Well, how did he get into Atten originally if it wasn't on one of those ships, right? So, like, there's still a lot of questions around Captain Rennet and what his overall plans were. So, I think there's more to discover for sure next episode. And if he was the supervisor, it would make a lot of sense on how he maneuvered these things. But I don't think he was always the supervisor. I think if we find out he was the supervisor, it was more like he killed the supervisor and took control, and just same way we've seen a lot of these droids be controlled, especially if you want to say they're like older droids, like maybe an SM33. This constant switching between masters and stuff. Maybe he found a way to take control of all these droids, and once he killed the previous supervisor, nobody was really the wiser because he was by himself and he just took him out. Maybe there was a pirate attack. They killed all the pirates and he snuck into the supervisor's chamber, killed him, and was like, I'm going to take advantage of this now and live in paradise. I want to retire anyways. There's a lot of different possibilities, but I think him being Captain Renard is a very strong one.
And he can be and also still not be alive. Like he
Yeah,
could very much just be like a hologram from, hey, this happened 300 years ago, and this
right.
is like my presence being preserved. Like, God, Jedi with holograms. What, you don't think that the Star Wars universe with all these holograms and AI and everything that you can't have
Yeah, like a
some
Jor-El.
version of him? Yeah, exactly. Right. So a Jor-El situation. And if you want to go a little bit more sinister with it, you can go like the architect from the Matrix, right? There's a lot of different pop culture references that they can pull here, put in the Star Wars blender, and come create something new out of it, right? And I think that's what the show has done really well for me. It's unlike other Star Wars where it's sometimes like feeding itself other Star Wars media and then kind of either becoming too similar or too different. This is taking other pop culture, other, you know, well-read or well-liked pieces of media and bringing it into this world of Star Wars. So it's working for me in that way. So yeah, I wouldn't mind that. It could also, like Liam said in our predictions, could just be like a robot hive mind, like when Renard was dead, they just continued and continued and continued. Like maybe this
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to have. I think they didn't. It's very curious to me that they didn't go for just 1138 storage rooms. They went
Hmm.
for 1139. So I think the 1138 might have been created afterwards, where they weren't supposed to make this many, but that was the only thing they were programmed to do: continue to maintain the mint, make sure the production was good, and store it. And it's like, oh man, like no wonder this became like a fabled treasure planet, because Renard had a past or knew someone from Atom and was like, oh my god, we have so much money. What are we doing with it here? Like 300, 400 years ago. It's like, what's the point? I'm living in the High Republic era, but I gotta stay on this like disguised planet and all that. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's riding on this finale. Luckily, I don't think it's gonna be too much for this show to handle. It just make sure it's gotta be 40 minutes minimum.
Yeah, hopefully. I really hope so. Anthony says, I really want to see Jod's backstory. Or is it Jod or Rennet? Who are you talking about in this one? Even if it's not in the show, maybe book or comic. I assume you're talking about Jod. And I agree. If you're talking about Jod, I would love to know at least. I don't need to see his backstory, but I would love to at least know where he came from. If it was just that he was born with the Force and he learned to survive and use his powers to his fullest advantage, which we still don't see him. He doesn't use his powers very often. We
No.
barely see him use it. He is willing to stay captured the entire episode and then uses the Force at the end to remove his own binders, right? So he could have done something, maybe, and released the airlock to get out with the force. Like, I don't know. It seemed he very much so picks and chooses the times when he wants to use it. So um, there's something there as well. But I would like to at least have a line about where he came from, even if we never see it. But agree that it's a mystery that needs to be answered in some form.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to know a little bit more, even if we don't get the whole thing, right? It could definitely be a cliffhanger to like that rumored show where he's leading a bunch of pirates still. He might not necessarily die in the show. I don't know if the show's even primed for him to die because, again, slimy, passionate, opportunistic, but not necessarily inherently evil so far, right? Like even when he's fighting for the right of captaincy with Fern in 2 episodes ago, he's like, Fern, just give in. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible, right? So he's not trying to outright kill anybody except for Brutus because just screw that guy. But yeah, so it'll be very interesting how much of his characterization will reflect what we actually do learn. If they're trying to save some stuff, if they're trying to spin him off to be like maybe the skeleton crew character that pops up in the Maniverse, and maybe just cameos from the kids here and there. I don't know. I mean, and all this is in some ways maybe in flux because maybe they are looking at like how well has the show been received critically, really super well. Ratings wise, it hasn't really broken any. I don't think it's broken the top 10 at all for Nielsen. So if it manages to with the next like episode 4 or 5 onwards, and at least the finale in the episode, maybe that changes the influence on Mandiverse. And again, we don't want it to just be a Mandalorian situation where it's like, oh my god, that's a unique thing, what a unique voice in Star Wars, and then it suddenly becomes its own pocket universe. That was more understandable. But this one, it doesn't need to, and I don't think the situation demands that. And in some ways, because of that, I'm not really demanding to know everything about Jod.
Mrs. Mandarin said, "I know it was wrong, but I laughed when he went off on the kids." No, I did
I did
too.
too.
I thought it was
I did
funny.
too.
Been waiting for that for a few episodes. Anthony says, "I believe you're still talking about Jod. He also has a limited crew. Also, why is his lightsaber still blue if he's a villain? Is it because the crystal now is hard? No, it's hard. I his heart. No, well, the bleeding of the crystals is a process. It's not something anybody can do. It's
Yeah.
something that is supposed to be you pour all your hate and your anger and like all your power into it. Since that was created for canon, personally, I feel like it's been very diluted, both in the Acolyte and in Jedi Survivor. We see characters do it just effortlessly, and I felt like Survivors was the worst one. Like Dagan Yara gets out of his back to tank, and he's just like, "Oh, yep, now it's red." And then May does it at least in a moment of passion. So I like that a little bit more, but we saw in the comics how hard it was for Darth Vader to do it, and I just feel like all these other characters are doing it. It should be a process. So yeah, Jod's lightsaber wouldn't turn red just if he was bad. He would have to go through this entire process. It's also not his lightsaber. He took it from the vault, so it was some other Jedi's lightsaber that was blue that we saw in the previous episodes. So unless he was to bleed it in between episodes or during an episode, it would stay blue until a force user decided to bleed the crystal.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything there. I push back just a little bit on Osha's bleeding of the crystal just because I think that was a good moment. I think it works visually, seeing kind of shoot up the blade. But yeah, I absolutely agree about Dagon. That was just like he pulls it out. He's like, I'm mad. It's like, what? Okay. Twist is the crystal bleeding? I don't know. That should still be a process. Or like it should be almost like frozen in between. And like he had like an orangish lightsaber like Balin, and then
Hmm.
you've taken the next step or something, right? Like it was already there. And that really does reflect his character. He's very selfish. He's always got a lot of pride in him, but he is also trying to protect the temple and this knowledge of learning on Tanalor and everything. And he feels abandoned by the Jedi Order, which, he was in a lot of ways. So, and his closest friend in the Jedi. So, yeah, that one is a little weird to me of all the three. I agree. I wish bleeding was a little bit more dramatic, like it was in the Charles Soule Vader line. But I will say I don't mind it being a lot more difficult. It is still an Anakin turning into Vader, like, has the title, but not necessarily the body yet. He's go fighting against a practitioner of the Bearish Vow, who the species that we know is quite long-lived, so I could not be entirely surprised by the fact that, maybe that crystal is super fortified, super concentrated in a way that someone like who is a little bit off balance, like Soul has been increasingly year after year, and then someone like a Dagon who's already slipped, but kind of been frozen in place. So yeah, again, I wish things were more like dramatic, but I think at bare minimum it should be OSHA level of like, okay, you're seeing it physically happen instead of like flip of a switch like Dagon.
Mrs. Mandarin says the kids were clever when you use the girl who has the patch over her eyes or the machine over her eyes to make the voice increase. One of the bad guys with the machine. Yeah, thought that was a fun little scene. I mean, I think we all kind of expected it to end the way it did, but it was a valiant attempt by those kids.
Yeah.
Also says Mrs. Mandarin also agrees with me that the 29 minutes is ridiculous. I completely agree. I'll harp on it forever. It doesn't matter if the show is perfect. I just think big budget studio shows like this 29 minutes is crazy. It just
Yeah.
really needs to be I think it needs to be minimum 35, but it really should be 40. I mean, we got CW shows doing 42 minutes every episode, right? Like it's, I feel like but shows with this bigger budget,
Yeah.
they should hit a minimum. And I think if again, if Disney Plus just standardized it, if they just said our shows, the what we can afford, what we want to make, they're 30-minute episodes. Great. Then we know what to expect and it's standardized and writers can plan for it. But it really just feels like when you have these shorter episodes that writers decided, okay, well, we either want to do really a 6-episode show and we need to come up with some extra stuff for 8, or we had a bunch of stuff that we just decided to cut because we didn't think the audience was actually like that. I know we got a comment later from Gascano's dentist saying that uh, traditionally longer episodes would help Disney with Nielsen ratings. And again, that's absolutely true, but Nielsen ratings don't really matter to these companies. It's just a framework to see who's how many hours people are watching. Disney doesn't make more money by us watching more hours.
Yeah.
They make money by us being subscribed. So they're going to do whatever they feel is keeping people subscribed. If their analytics or whatever their research is telling them that yeah, 35 to 25-minute episodes are what people's attention spans are, and we need to do those to keep people subscribed, and yeah, we'll once in a while have longer episodes, but that should be our sweet spot. Which, now looking at Mandalorian season 3, looking at not as much Ahsoka was kind of the one outlier, but it did have a couple 30-minute episodes. But looking at Mandalorian season 3, looking at Acolyte, looking at Skeleton Crew, 3 of the last 4 shows have been really short episodes for the majority of their runtime. And so it's almost the standard now to expect for Star Wars on Disney Plus to be closer to the 30-minute mark than the 40-minute mark. And I think I just think that's a mistake. I think in today's world, when you're competing with so many other prestige shows, I think you need to make at least visually. That's the first thing people see when they click on your show, right? Besides the title. I think visually you need to at least make your show look more attractive, look more like a prestige show. So I don't know what their analytics are saying. I understand what you're saying, Gascano's dentist, but I don't think that necessarily matters. They don't really care about Nielsen ratings. They want people to subscribe. So maybe something their research is telling them is saying that people want shorter episodes, but I personally doubt it.
Yeah, and you can make the argument that like kids are so prime for like 23-minute episode runtimes, especially if they're of the generation or like the end of the generation that was watching on like Cartoon Network and all that on TVs, but now they're watching everything on streaming apps and all that. But really, that's not really an excuse because this is Star Wars and it's Disney. It's not like they're hurting for money. Yes, last year was a bad year for them theatrically. The parks under Chapek did suffer. No one is denying that. But so did all these other studios, and they're still putting it out, right? And it's not like they're a small extreme service. They jumped out to top 3 very quickly, and they haven't been bleeding like others have. So, yes, effects and all that are a higher level with ILM. I understand those things that might take this format of like a 45-minute standard down to a 40 for Disney. I can even understand it for like very effects heavy episodes to be dropped down to 35. But to a 30, like just have the kids walk or talk, or like we were saying, more stuff with the parents. Cause that is like if you're gonna make a direct like comparison to this being like a Stranger Things, but in Star Wars that Disney really wanted for this to be continued and all that spun off, you need the parents to feel a little bit more competent and in what they're doing. They just feel like they're maybe a step above the kids, but it's the kids taking the risk that's actually helped them out more versus the parents who've been kind of like we have to navigate the system and like the little cracks that are there here. Like it's maybe a fairly mature storyline to appreciate, but not when they only have like 3 or 4 minutes every couple episodes.
Well, we're going to wrap up here in the next 15 minutes or so. So if you guys want to get those last questions in, send in a super chat. We will answer it first. If not, we're still going through the chat, trying to get to as many as possible. Excuse me. So we will try to get to all of yours. And also another reminder for those of you who might not have been there at the beginning of the stream, we are going live tomorrow to discuss everything that came out in 2024, as well as do a 2025 preview. So if you guys are interested in that, we'd love a lot of you guys to come over and join us for tomorrow's stream as well. The chat room will be live tonight, so you guys can start sending in your chats. And we do have priority chats for members and Patreon. So if you would like to send it in there, join our Patreon, YouTube memberships, you can get priority, as well as super chats. Obviously we'll get priority, but we want to know your guys' favorite stuff of last year, your least favorite stuff of last year, what you're most looking forward to in 2025. And if you want to know what's coming out in 2025, we're going to have a list of everything tomorrow. So join us tomorrow for another stream with Star Wars Lads. All right, back to the chat here. We have Kylie Stewart, who says, how cool would it be if Wim and Jod had a force battle? Certainly be a change for the show. I don't really think Wim is going to be revealed to be a force sensitive. Maybe. But at this point, I feel like it would kind of be coming out of left field. But we'll see. We'll see what they decide to do in this show.
Yeah, I think already with the last episode, he learned that he's more of a true Jedi by just trying to help, try to do the right thing instead of making a scene. He still is making that mistake here. Like they're like, okay, guys, Fern's like KB and Fern and Neil are like, okay, we got to figure out a plan. He's like, attack, and it's like, okay, well, he's still a kid. He's still rambunctious and all that stuff. But I think for the most part, he has taken a big step to understanding that even if he doesn't understand how the Force works, what it means to be a Jedi is to kind of do the right thing and care for the people that you're looking after. So I think he'll have a scene more like that where KB rightfully calls him a Jedi. He listens, he's attentive, and he does what's needed, and he doesn't overstep. He does exactly what's needed. And that's kind of what a Jedi ultimately should be. It is very subjective, and I think that is something that prequel Jedi forget about because of all the stuff that happens in the High Republic and all the years of influence of the bureaucracy of the Senate and the Sith influence and all that. It's a big thing to pay attention to, and I think that's something that he'll highlight, I'd say, in the finale, especially now that he's reunited with his dad and they can kind of hash out some of the things about like not lost childhood per se, but what's missing, what's not driving him, what is driving him, what he's learned. And I think all the kids will to some degree, but definitely him. And I think Wim's father will be like, "You're just trying to be a good person, and I'll do what I can to help you, and you do what you need to do." Right. So I see it like that. I also don't think Jod is really super telekinetic. Like he has powers, but I don't know if I would say like, oh, he's gonna force pull like a ship out of the sky like Vader. Obviously not, right? But I also don't know if he's like gonna be like Vader on Cloud City, like pulling the pistol from Han's hand. He hasn't really shown something to that level and power yet. It's more like parlor tricks that he's amplified and given a little bit of razzle dazzle because he is a pirate. So yeah, even if they had a force fight, I think it would be like a bunch of people are punching and kicking and running around, and then maybe like a force swipe or like a push or something.
Gascano's dentist says, who do you all think the supervisor is? Well, we've talked a lot about that, so I don't know if we'll go fully into it again. Hopefully we answered your question earlier. But yeah, I think that there's still a lot of different options. I think the Tack Rennet thing is certainly a possibility, strong possibility. I think the kind of robot hive mind, like talked about in the past, and yeah, maybe with like the Jor-El type of figure of Tack Rennet on that part of the artificial intelligence could be part of it as well. It could be we've talked about it in the past. I think this one's getting a little less likely, but could be maybe an old Republic name that we're familiar with from maybe Legends, a descendant of somebody who's just like their descendants have just stayed in charge of Atten as kind of this behind the scenes supervisor for years, and it's a name drop that we know, like a last name that we know, or former Jedi who decided to find solace here or protection, or a former Sith who maybe left the Sith Order when it was, before Bane, before it was Baneite. But I think it could be any of those things. It could just be a guy. It could just be somebody random, like the Wizard of Oz. So it could be all those. I'm leaning towards the Tack Rennet thing, whether he's alive or not. I think it is going to be related back to him.
Yeah, that can only repeat the same stuff. I hope that there's some interesting like pop culture connections or like references or I'm blanking on the word, but similarity to what we've already seen. And that's why I brought up like if you're going more dark, go with like the Matrix's architect. If we're going what we've seen already in Star Wars, you can do holocrons and all that. Or if we're going to go a little bit more positive, a Jor-El from the original Superman, right? So there's a lot of ways of making this be. Man, I'm blanking on the word. An homage, right, to all these other uh, pop culture, well-liked stories that kids don't necessarily know, but are gonna get their first taste of through Star Wars. So I wouldn't mind something like that. I also wouldn't mind just us being completely wrong and like we get some big thing that isn't necessarily is huge for the show's finale or at least season finale, but might actually have a role to play with the New Republic, with Thrawn, with the Manoverse conflict, but not necessarily on at Atten itself.
Next up, we have Anthony, who says the kids were extremely resourceful and are similar to the Losers Club from It. Yeah, I think that's certainly an inspiration. It really inspired so many of these,
Yeah.
children's groups in film and TV when when it was a novel, and I think especially that being one of the more recent kind of '80s style kid groups that people are familiar with the newer movies. I think that's probably an inspiration as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Mrs.
I mean, I think they aged up, or not aged up, they moved it from the 50s setting to the 80s setting too, because yeah, Finn Wolfhard, the 80s was in full swing nostalgia with the late 2010s. It made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Anthony, or no, Mrs. Mandarin says, "Does the mom of the captain girl have force powers?" I assume you're talking about Fern, her mom Farah, the undersecretary. Doesn't seem like it. I haven't seen anything in the show that's made me believe that she has any force sensitivity.
Yeah, I don't think she does. I think maybe like that scene of her like letting the little beacon go up with the message. Maybe it might be look like, oh, like she's using the force to get it up. But I think that's just repulsor technology and then a little bit of help with the minimal amount of fuel that it has to get up to the barrier.
Anthony says, "I think it's possible Jod's mother was a Jedi and maybe she gave him to pirates to protect him from the Empire." That's a possibility. We've seen that kind of storyline happen a lot in the past, where you were given to a lesser evil, even if it made your life hard. Um, so I think that's a cool idea. I could see that of having happened, but in that case, he wouldn't really know his parents. So if we got the backstory out of his mouth, we wouldn't really know where he came from. We would just know he was raised by pirates.
Yeah, I mean, he could be like a darker Peter Quill, right? Kind of got all this unfathomable power. Mother dies or father dies, and hidden away, he doesn't really know anything other than what's presented in front of him that first couple years of his life. And then he kind of stumbled, and it could just be that he stumbles into it, right? Like Peter doesn't
Mhm.
get like swooped up in that necessarily. He kind of makes a mistake, and it's like, oh my god, like what am I on? Oh, wow. And then it works out for him because it keeps him as like a human in a cosmic MCU that doesn't really have that many humans. fairly well protected because he's with the Ravagers. He's with everyone that would be nasty, horrifying, and definitely not Jedi-like.
Gascanos Dentist says, I wish that Wim had meditated like a Jedi when Jod told him them to shut up. That would be that would be funny. I think it would be played for laughs. I would like Wim to have been taken a little bit more seriously at this point. He does get some serious moments last episode, but it does seem like he constantly is reverting back to being the goofy one.
Yeah.
And I think it works in the ensemble, but by this point he does seem to kind of go back and forth a lot between moments where he's kind of down or sad or wanting to be more, but then he's always reverting back to being impulsive and goofy. Um, where we have a moment in the beginning or in this episode where he's all bummed that he just had his adventure and it's already coming to a close. Uh, but then immediately after, back to being, more of comic relief. So I would like him to have maybe a stronger moment. Maybe episode 8 is that place, but it would have been funny if he did something like that and they made a joke about it. But I again, if that's related to force sensitivity, I don't necessarily buy that Wim is force sensitive.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's yeah, it's uh, yeah, I'll just say yes. I agree.
Then Gascano's dentist, the comment about the Nielsen ratings again. Don't think Disney really cares about where their show racks up in the Nielsen ratings. Yes, it would be more prestigious for random people looking, but as long as you stay subscribed, that's all they care about. Uh, Gascano's dentist or Anthony says Master and Apprentice is a good book. I love seeing Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in action. It's one of our favorites. It's ranked pretty highly on our tier list. You check out where we rank every Star Wars canon book if you want to in a tier list format. We posted that a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I really love that book. It's one of Claudia Gray's best.
I can only say that I wish I got to reread it again now because, man, it's such a good book. It feels like it's getting more and more influence as time goes on when we get to see a little bit more Dooku stories. We're getting a little bit more Qui-Gon. I think we're gonna get the hyperspace novel, graphic novel or something. Hyperspace Stories graphic novel this year. So we're gonna see a little bit more Qui-Gon. Obviously, Obi-Wan, we've been seeing a little bit more and more of him, and I do like the influence that it's had on bringing in a lot of stuff from, like, Jedi Apprentice and all that, but things like Rail Avril, like, all the new interesting things that came out of it, she Claudia Gray just manages to make original characters that I wanna be like, "Man, I need to at least see them animated once, if not on live action."
Well, we're about 10 minutes or less from wrapping up our stream, everybody. So, last chance, last call. Send in your questions. Send in a super chat if you want to make sure you get on tonight's stream. Not join us next week for episode 8, the finale of Skeleton Crew. And stay tuned for our predictions as well as other videos that we're going to have out. Again, join us tomorrow. Talk about your favorite stuff from 24 and the things you're looking forward to in 25 for Star Wars. We can't wait to have another great year in Star Wars. And we're looking forward to talking to you all. Shorts every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. Also polls twice a day, every day. Favorite Star Wars characters. Those have been a lot of fun. A lot of great comments in there. So check those out as well. Skywalker's Academy says we still haven't gotten that flashback to. I'm not really sure what you're talking about there.
I guess
Maybe I'm missing something.
flashbacks to Jod's
Yeah,
backstory?
maybe.
Yeah.
I thought it was a misspelling, but I feel like, backed is a very specific word. Maybe if you're still in
Yeah.
the chat, clarify what you were saying because I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're talking about. But yeah, if you're talking about Jod, hopefully we see that soon. Mrs. Mandarin says, "Yeah, I don't think Jod was a Jedi, but he was force sensitive and trained, but didn't become a Jedi." Yeah, I'm still not 100% sure if he was ever trained by an actual Jedi. He could have been just somebody who learned to use the Force because he had to. But I do think it's a possibility that he was trained to at least hone his skills by another Force sensitive. Just not 100% convinced it's a Jedi.
We've gotten a lot of, like, references, Easter eggs a little bit here and there throughout the show, like, I think when we first are at the pirate's lair in some of the earlier episodes, Jod turns on a droid, and it seems like it's referencing the Jedi Prince books there, so I wouldn't mind at all if in that same similar way, we're gonna get like a Jedi Apprentice reference where if you don't sorry, if you don't get uh picked up as a Jedi Apprentice, you kind of get sent to like the farming corp and all that. That was kind of what Obi-Wan was said to. It'd be hilarious if that's his grand origin. That nothing traumatic, nothing bad. It's just nobody picked him out, and they thought he was a little too weak to be anything more useful than just like a basic like farmhand.
Yeah. Yeah, the agricultural core, I think it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's that was a big thing in early prequel legends, right? Like it's in
yeah,
Yoda Dark Rendezvous also, it's in Red Harvest. It's one of the big plot points in Red Harvest.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't know, that would be really funny if that was that was actually his lot. Castle Grace Skull says the supervisor is Neil's grandfather. Yeah, I mean, there's been that theory going around that Neil's father or somebody related to Neil because of the statues and things you see um, is the actual supervisor. And that is still a possibility. We saw Neil's dad in the hologram. He didn't say anything. I don't think he said anything in the hologram. Um, in this episode. So he's there, which, if he's there in a secret hologram that they're sending to avoid the supervisor's droids, I don't really buy that he's the supervisor because if he actually wanted the hologram to get out, I don't know why they wouldn't just be able to send it out. But at first, I was starting to kind of see where that theory was coming from at the beginning of this episode because I was like, okay, Neil's mom shows up last,
yeah.
and then immediately after she shows up, the droids are here, but then they shoot her, even if it's just with the stun. She gets shot. I don't think that would really happen if Neil's dad was in charge or grandfather or whoever. And then they still get their message out and she's a part of the message. It wasn't like in the trailer, we knew the message had Farah, Fern's mom, in it because you see that in the trailer, but you don't see anybody else in the trailer message. So I wasn't sure. I was like, okay, maybe it is all a setup. But then you see her dad or Neil's dad and his mom in the message. I don't necessarily buy that they're related to the supervisor now, but still a possibility, I guess. But it would be a pretty elaborate setup to catch everybody else. But then also, like, nobody else seems to be in trouble, actually. So, like,
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't necessarily buy it.
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of get slaps on the wrist, even like when Wim's dad was trying to hide behind his back, like the little code
Yeah.
breaker that Neil's mom brought. So, yeah, I was kind of leaning that same way too because it's like we don't really get to see him. It could just have like a double agent amongst the parents, and I think that would do a lot with less screen time, right, in general. But yeah, I think that's out of the window now.
Castle Grayskull also says Jod is Captain Hook from Tatooine. We don't know where Jod's from, but he does have some classic pirate tropes for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think Tatooine is a great place to go to again and again and again and again and again and again and again. I think we're all kind of tired of Tatooine.
Yeah, I would prefer to move on. David Fieldson says treasure is precious and fragile and family as his family and friends. Yeah, this kind of goes back to your super chat. I think it's an addition to the super chat. And yeah, I agree. I thought that was a nice parallel to show what's important to both sets of characters. I thought it was a really strong finale. I was bummed that it was over, leaving it on cliffhanger, but looking forward to seeing what happens next week.
I think you make a key point though that it is fragile, right? Like Jod's touching it, it falls apart. Sure, is that like hinting at like, oh, the whole system will fall apart that easily? Maybe. I mean, they have everyone be like some sort of analyst, right? So, however, they're maintaining it on this closed off planet, it can't be easy, right? They're not trading, they're not doing any exports or any imports. It's just a mint for the same like 4 or 5 species that we know are on the planet through all the murals and everything. So I think it'll be pretty interesting to see just how quickly it could be like destabilized and all fall apart in Jod's hands, both literally and figuratively.
Anthony says, my scenario is his mother was a Jedi who had him sold to pirates to protect him from the Empire and was raised by them. And yeah, again, similar, like you mentioned, Sonic Peter Quill, also kind of Ray-esque. They give her to Unkar Plutt. That is something that could absolutely work for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think we know that via Jod. Like you'd have to find that information out via somebody else because he wouldn't really know that if he was sold when he was little, He wouldn't know that unless he was sold as like a, 7 to 12-year-old or something, and he thinks his mom just hated him. Then you would get a different perspective, but you wouldn't know that she sold him to protect him, unless she was there or somebody else was there to confirm that, right? So, whatever the perspective is we get of his childhood, it's certainly a possibility that is the case, but you wouldn't get that exact perspective unless it was coming from her.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's kind of just what we talked about before. It'll be interesting to see whatever they do choose to share and if they are trying to hint at more story to be unfolded, but not necessarily in Skeleton Crew.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the last 2 hours to discuss Skeleton Crew episode 7. It was a really fun episode to discuss, and we can't wait to discuss the finale next week. So stay tuned for episode 8's live next week. It'll be probably about the same time, 7:30 Pacific, discussing the latest episode. We'll try to have the chat out early so you guys can send in your chats as early as you want, and you got to watch the episode mostly to discuss the episode. But we do usually post the chat room around, somewhere in the afternoon. So stay tuned for that. Again, join us next week or tomorrow, actually, for the stream about 2024, 2025. We want to discuss all that with you guys. So bring your favorites, your least favorites, your rankings of all the stuff you read, watched, played in 2024. Bring your predictions or your things you're looking forward to most for 2025. Stay tuned for our predictions and speculation episode, which will be out during the weekend or end of the weekend, Monday. Keep an eye out for that. It'll be the last one of this series. So we're looking forward to giving you guys more crystallized predictions for next week. Stay tuned for that. Also have some more videos coming out soon. I'll be doing my next bookshelf tour soon. We have Tears of the Nameless review finally coming out. Stay tuned for all that stuff. Shorts, again, 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Friday. Keep an eye out for shorts. If you're interested in voting for your favorite Star Wars character of all time, we're going strong with those community polls still, 2 a day, every day. So you can vote for your favorites. Check out the rankings. They're posted on the comment of every single one of those, the pinned comment, so you can see the full top 100 ranking if you're interested in that. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. We enjoyed the conversation, and we will see you guys all next week. Good night, everyone.